DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you are expecting to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. What's that, Dre? That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques, all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is part 2 of our ongoing 4-part mini-series, which is the case for homeschooling. If you did not catch episode 1, which was previous episode to this in the feed, make sure you go back and catch it. We're going to pick up right where we left off as soon as we get into the material. But first, let me remind you of a couple things. My text message number down below in the description. The link to get on my email list for free, get my emails every single day. That's workonmygame.com down below in the description. And the link to learn more about having me as your personal coach, getting into our coaching programs, get access to all of our trainings around mindset, strategy, systems, and accountability with me helping you along the way directly. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Guess what? That link is also down below in the description. Picking up where we left off again, we are on point number 4 of our series here, which is going to be the case for homeschooling. Point number 4 is the following. If you send your kids to school and your kids end up having a different worldview or a different understanding of the world, different understanding of life than what you would want them to have, you are 100% responsible. So what I mean by, what does worldview mean? Worldview means your child's understanding of right from wrong, what is true and what is not true, what they believe or what they will not believe, what they will stand for, what they will not stand for, what is okay and what is not okay. That's the worldview. Some people may call these principles. Your kids learn these from you as a parent, if you are doing your job as a parent. The problem is when you're sending your kids for 8 hours a day to a school and you don't really have control over what's being taught there, there is a chance that the worldview installed into your kids, because the school is spending more time with the kids than you are, and the internet is spending more time with your kids than you are, there's a good chance that the internet and school combined will install a worldview that conflicts with the worldview that you would want your child to have, and that becomes your fault because you're the one who didn't do your job and make sure that you were getting more time with your child than the internet or the school was. But you sent them to school, you gave them a phone, or you're paying for it, so who's responsible? You are. Now, it's possible you can get lucky and school and the internet could teach your kids a worldview that completely aligns with your own. If that's the way that it goes, great. And if you're going to send your kids to school, you should be checking that whatever is being taught in that school is aligned with the way that you see things. If it's not, you shouldn't be sending your kids to a school. Period. There's no excuse. No excuse. If you don't think it's possible for a boy to become a girl, but in the school that you're sending your kids, they believe that it is possible for a boy to become a girl, here's my question to you, parent. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Because your kid might get in trouble or get chastised by classmates or a teacher if they go to school with a worldview that that's not possible because you taught it to them. What you going to do? Now, this is a question you really have to answer. Now, if you send your kids to a private school, you probably have a whole lot more say. But even there's a private school down here in Miami. I had heard of it, but I had never physically seen the building because it's not very close to where I live. But I happened to be down in that area, and I happened to turn on a certain street, and I drove past the school. I said, oh, this is the school that I've heard about. I didn't know where exactly it was located, but here it is. Beautiful school, nice campus. And as I was driving past it, I noticed that there was a big rainbow flag up on the wall on the outside of the school. I said, oh, even in private schools, they're doing this, huh? All right, my kid ain't going there. I mean, when he's old enough, he ain't going there. I'm not paying $30,000 a year for a school to teach my kid about the rainbow flag or to teach them that they are somehow disadvantaged because of their skin color, or that a boy can turn into a girl or a girl can turn into a boy, or that they're supposed to call somebody by their preferred pronouns. Fuck that. I'm not paying you $30,000 a year for you to tell that to my kid. That's not happening. And I'm damn sure not sending them to a public school to be taught the exact same thing. So again, if I want to send my kid to a school, let's just say I decide to change my mind, I want to send my kid to a school, they're going to go to a school where all the things that I believe, the principles that I stand on are, we're going to be 100% in lockstep. And if they are teaching at that school anything that goes against the principles that I'm going to install into my child, then my child's not going to that school, period. We'll figure it out. They ain't going to that school. And any of you as a parent, if you are solid in your principles and solid in your worldview, you should know exactly what it is Your kids should know what it is because you should be telling it to them. And then when you see the school is teaching something that goes against that, then that school should be completely off the list. Period. Again, there's no walking around this. There are no exceptions. Remember what I've told you all about principles. You have principles, you have standards, and you have tactics. Principles are etched in stone, they do not change, and there are no exceptions. Your worldview is an installation of your principles. That's what your worldview is all your principles and how they all work together with each other. If you have no principles, then your kid can take any worldview they want because you ain't giving them any principles. So whatever they get, they get. All right, this is how you end up with kids hating you because they get taught something that goes against the grain of who their parents are, and now they're mad at you because again, the school gets more time with them than you, and you can't outdo the amount of time the school is getting because you're sending them there every day. You ain't got the time, or at least you're not making the time. So you see how these problems start to compound upon each other? If you allow the school to raise your kids, then whatever the school decides to teach them is who they're going to become. My question is, are you okay with that? It's a rhetorical question, but it is a question. Back in the days, the thing is, it was just school and parents. There were no phones. We didn't have phones. So you could keep your kid from watching TV or playing video games if you wanted to, because you could pretty much control it. You give your kid a phone, all right, they're going to start doing things on that phone that you will never know about, and they know how to stop you from finding out. And that's it. That's it. So now you got to deal with multiple factors here. What are you going to do about this? I'm just posing this question. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, what schools were telling kids were often in line with what parents were telling kids at home. Why is this? Because there was a generally accepted set of standards and principles that we all pretty much agreed upon, depending on where you came from. Whatever community you came from, the teachers were usually from that same community. We all had pretty much the same worldview amongst the people in that same community. So there wasn't too much conflict between what was happening at school and what was happening at home. What changed was that now we have a much wider, a more vast ocean, for lack of a better term, of ideas, worldviews, principles, standards, and just ways of looking at life these days than there was 30 years ago. There's a much wider ocean these days. Why is that? One of those reasons is because the internet has democratized access to information. So people have more access to different ways of thinking about things because you have more people talking about them these days than you had access to in the 1990s. That makes it a harder job for parents to raise your kids the way you want them to come up because you have to control and inoculate them against more stuff now than you did back then. The issue is parents are just as busy now as they were in the past, actually even more busy now than we were in the past, which means parents often are able to give less time and attention to their kids than parents did back in the days. Again, most of you who are full-grown adults, your parents were able to give you a whole lot of time and attention back then compared to what they can now because you never looked at your parents back in the day and saw the back of their smartphone because they were looking at their phone rather than looking at you because there were no phones. The attention is less. The available attention is less for parents these days based on our lifestyles, which means your kids have more options to learn from people other than you than they had, again, than we had as kids back in the day. This makes it more challenging to be a parent. That's the whole point here. So there was very little discrepancy back then between one set of ideals and another set of ideals, i.e. the ideals at home and the ideals at school. You were basically being taught the same things. Your teachers are from the same place that your parents were from, in the general sense. These days, there's a gap. And the gap seems to be growing wider and wider because, again, it's easier to get radicalized into vastly different things these days because there are so many different access points to information and insights and points of view. I will be damned, I told you, if I'm going to have some blue-haired liberal white woman telling my son that he is somehow disadvantaged because of his skin tone, or that a boy can decide that he's a girl if he wants to be, or that if he feels like a girl, he can become one, or any other social, political, or environmental nonsense that I generally do not agree with, I'm not going to have them teaching that to my kid. And I'm damn sure not going to have my kid coming home and arguing with me about what they learned in school and arguing with me and my principles because what they learned from their bum-ass teacher is somehow going against the grain of what is believed in my home. That's not going to happen. I'm not even allowing the seeds to be planted. And as a parent, you should have the exact same idea. Before you send your kid to a school, you better find out what they're teaching at that school. What's okay and what's not okay at that school. Who are the kids your kid's going to be interacting with? You should know about all this stuff. If you're not getting my drift, let me be even more clear. Any school, or any adult for that matter, who I send my child to be influenced by, needs to have the same principles that I have. If we don't align on principle, then I'm not sending my kid to hang with your kid. I'm not sending my kid to hang with you because your principles are not aligned with my principles. And again, we can have different opinions. We cannot have different principles. Let me repeat what I just said. We can have different opinions. We cannot have different principles. If you think it's okay for your kid to eat potato chips, and I don't think it's okay for my kid to eat potato chips, that's a difference in opinion. I'm okay with that difference in opinion. Just don't give my kid any of those damn potato chips when he's over at your house playing with your kid. But if you believe that a boy can become a girl, that's a principle difference. And no, we can't be friends. No, well, me and you we can be cordial, but no, my kid is not going to be hanging with your kid because what you're teaching your kid is antithetical to what I want my kid to understand. So no, I'm not sending my kid to hang with you, and your kid ain't coming over here. Period. So again, opinions difference, fine. Principle difference, not fine. Challenge for many of you adults listening to this right now, especially you parents, is that you have no principles. You don't even know what your principles are. So it's easy. You are easily persuaded by somebody who's just a really smooth talker. And a lot of people preaching nonsense these days are intelligent people who are very good with words, and they can talk you into anything, and they can talk you into it. Imagine what they're going to do to a 12-year-old who doesn't have your language abilities. You see where the problem stems from? You see how this can become a problem? And the reason why I can say what I'm saying here, again, if your principles and standards are not aligned with mine, then I'm not mixing my kids with yours. I can say this because I'm the parent. I have ultimate authority over what happens with my child. I have ultimate authority over what they're going to consume. And this is not a debatable point. Now, there are some parents listening to this who say, well, you're more hands-off than your parent. You're more hands-off as a parent. You want your kids to believe whatever they want to believe and think how they want to think. And you don't believe in this authoritarian, controlling way of looking at things as a parent. That's completely fine. All right, you and I ain't on the same page. All right, my kid and your kid probably wouldn't play together. That's completely fine. You keep listening to the show. But I'm telling you exactly what it is. Moving on to point number 5. We're talking here today about the case for homeschooling. Number 5, touched on this in yesterday's episode. You can partner with other parents and pool resources and homeschool multiple kids at once. I've heard about this. Again, they call it a pod. A pod will be, again, 5 parents get together. Your kids are all relatively the same age. You can hire one homeschool teacher, bring everybody to one house, and there's your interaction piece. You control the environment because you know who's who and what they're doing. You know the principals of the other parents there. You know it's a safe environment that they're in. And you control the homeschool teacher because the teacher they got to follow certain curriculum based on maybe the state mandates. But other than that, you tell the teacher what you want them teaching your kids and what you don't want them teaching your kids, and that's it. So you're able to kill multiple birds with one stone, metaphorically. Socialization challenge is handled. The resources challenge is handled because maybe you can't afford the homeschool teacher out of your own pocket, but 5 of you together can afford one teacher, right? So the cost is deferred. So if you and all those other parents get together, again, you can send everybody to one house. Everybody's paying for one teacher. The kids can engage with each other. They all get taught, and you can save money on the cost in addition to your kids socializing. All right, the time is taken care of, and you know who the parents are, and you know who the kids are. So you know that your kid is in the environment that you want them to be in. All your problems are solved. This requires you having relationships with other parents. All right, that's the issue that you got to resolve. So this will require you to be the one who's socializing and making sure, again, that you are connected with other parents who see things the same way that you see things. And as an added bonus, you get complete control over which kids your kid is going to be around. This is a big deal for my parents when I was young. I was not homeschooled. I went to public school. But anytime I started to show interest in being around certain kids, whether it was at school or it was in the neighborhood, my mother would always, I could tell my mother was looking at those kids with a very discerning eye. Like, who is this kid you're hanging with? What's his home situation? Who are his parents? And my mom would look into it and find out who is this kid that you seem to be showing interest in, and find out what that kid was about. And she would either be okay with it and she would encourage me hanging with the kid, or she would discourage it because she didn't like that kid's profile, didn't like that kid's background or who his parents were. And my mother would discourage me hanging around that kid. And it's the same thing that you need to do these days. And if you're not paying attention to this, then again, who's raising your children? Right? Ask yourself the question. If my mom didn't like the quality of the parents of a kid that I was hanging with, she would do whatever she needed to do to get me away from them. She did the same thing with my sister. Just making sure, like, hey, there's a certain worldview that my mother had and a certain way of looking at the world that she had. And she wanted to make sure that whoever we hung with, her kids hung with, that they came from similar, they were cut from a similar cloth. And if she didn't like what she saw, then she would do what she had to do to get rid of that situation. Moving on to point number 6, and I'm saying you all should be doing the same thing as parents yourselves. And many of you have abdicated this responsibility. Moving on to point number 6, we're talking here today, the case for homeschooling. Number 6, customized learning. Just talked about this. The curriculum can be tailored to your child's strengths, interests, and pace, which ensures that they understand and are interested in the material. All right, you all understand that the school system teaches a standardized education system. The problem with the standardized education system is that human beings are not standard. We're not robots. We are not automatons rolling off an assembly line. But everybody has to get the exact same education, the exact same classes, and get past the exact same courses in order to get the exact same degree. This doesn't make sense because most people are not designed for the standard process. And if you're not doing well in the standard process, you get left behind, you get bad grades, you get your parents called up to the counselor's office because somehow, some way, something is quote unquote wrong with your child. And that stigma can stick with a child in their mind their entire lives, simply because they're being run through the ringer of a standardized process. Now, you can get good at mastering and doing well within a standardized process. It doesn't mean that the standardized process is good. I'm not a standard individual, but because of who my mother was, she understood the education system very well. She conditioned my sister and I to do very well working through the standardized process, even though I was not a standard individual. My sister was very good at the standardized process, and now she works in it herself. I'm not saying that as a negative or a positive, just as a reality. I realized during my process of going through the standardized system that this was not the system for me. So I knew that I needed to get out of it as quickly as possible. So I went through K through 12. And then when I got to college, I started looking for what were my alternatives. I knew I was going to play sports. When I found entrepreneurship, I said, that's what I'm going to do. Internet came along right after that. And here we are. But I knew I wasn't going to go through the standard process. I knew that was not the life for me because I was not built to work in a standard situation. I'm just not that type of person. I'm not mentally wired for it. Some of you are. I'm not. But we all can agree not everybody is. So when you run people through a standardized system and then someone doesn't do so well in that standardized system, they are often stigmatized as if something is wrong with them when actually something is wrong with the process. That you're putting everyone in the same process and then saying if you don't do well in this process, then you're the problem. No, the problem is the fact you're putting everybody through the same process. But when you are homeschooling, you get to customize the learning process for your child. So if they're not standard, good. Then their non-standardness, if you will, can be catered to because you're controlling it. We know about school. Most of you went to regular quote unquote school, whether public or private. Most of you listening to this probably did not go through homeschooling at all. And we know the school has what? Your kids sit in classes, quote unquote, learning things that they will never use in real life and often having to memorize and regurgitate what is essentially useless information. That's what school is. You are essentially being taught to learn information that is useless. And it's not that the information is useless in that it can never be applied. It's useless in that you are being forced to internalize and regurgitate it as if when you get into the real world, you will have access to things like Google and ChatGPT that will give you the exact same answer that you were forced to study for 9 hours a week just so you could pass a test to prove what? That you operate through the standard system? What's the point? Now, again, in the 1990s, there may have been more of a case for this nonsense, but there's no case for it now because in the 1990s, you couldn't pull up ChatGPT on your phone and get an explanation of, for example, tell me how the hydratic formula works. Is it the hydratic formula? No, it's the, what's the name of that formula? See, this is exactly my point. The formula is called the quadratic formula. There we go. Quadratic. Okay, so I'm asking ChatGPT to tell me how the quadratic formula works. So it tells you how much of it I remembered. I don't even remember what it's called. So the quadratic formula is used to find the solutions, also known as the roots, of a quadratic equation which has the standard form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. I don't remember any of this shit, but I have a college degree. All right, here a, b, and c are constants, and a does not equal 0. The formula is x equals negative b plus or minus you divide b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And the steps to solving the quadratic formula, this is actually very long. So I'm not even going to read this out because this is crazy. And if you're going to get a high school diploma, you got to somehow show that you know this shit. All right, why do I need to know this? I don't need to know this anymore. And in the 1990s, there was a case for telling me why I needed to understand this because there was no phone that could just give me the answer. Nowadays, there's a phone that can give me an answer. I don't need to know this, but school puts you in there for 8 hours a day, quote unquote, teaching you to quote unquote learn this bullshit just so it can prove that you have a standardized education, which is completely useless. Now, I know I'm just using this as an example. I'm just using this as an example. There are some things being taught in schools that are actually useful. Okay, I'm not saying it's all useless, but I'm also saying you don't need 4 hours a day. 8 hours a day, to teach it. And when the government controls things, folks, just as a general rule, when the government is in control of things, you get inefficiencies and ineffectiveness, and you get people doing things just for the sake of doing them because bureaucracies move very slowly. And the United States government is the biggest, slowest, most inefficient bureaucracy in existence. And you're sending your kids to a school teaching them based on that bureaucracy. It's ineffective. It is inefficient. Things move slowly. People just want to protect their jobs and protect their paychecks. That includes your kids' teachers. They want to protect their jobs and they protect their paychecks. They will do whatever the system tells them to do so they can keep getting their check every 2 weeks. That's not a knock on the teachers who are listening to this, but if I'm wrong, teachers, let me know. Exactly. I know the game. When the government controls things, this is what you get. This is the inevitable result of the government having control over something. This is why I am highly skeptical of anything run by the government. Anything. And it doesn't matter who the president is, by the way. You are not giving people stuff that they can use in a real world outside of, again, the basics you can get in school: reading, writing, arithmetic. Yes, your kids need to know those things, but they can learn reading, writing, and arithmetic through homeschooling. They don't need to go to a school to learn that. What are other things they need to learn in school? History. There are books that they need to read. What else? Social studies, math, not math. We said that. But art class, gym class. Again, what of these things cannot be taught at home with you spending time with your damn kids? Again, why do you need to send them to school for this? Many parents are of this belief that they need to send their kids to school without really thinking about if it makes any sense and why. How does this even make sense? See, it's not just in education, folks. That just happens to be the topic today when I'm dissing the government. They are ineffective and inefficient with pretty much everything that they run. The only thing they run really well and highly efficiently is, I would say, the military and our defense system. We're really good with that. But as far as the spending on defense and where the money is going and all of that, that's ineffective and inefficient as well. But at least their ineffectiveness and inefficiency have us over ready for handling any problems when it comes to any type of militaristic situation. I will say that. When you are homeschooling, ladies and gentlemen, you have much more say and control over what's being taught, how long it takes for it to be taught, and you generally have power over anything that you don't want taught or that you don't generally see as valuable. Your kid can read, write, and do math. They're good. Now, everything else is extra. That's the way I look at it. Read, write, do math. Everything else is extra. And it doesn't mean everything else isn't needed, because every human being probably does things other than read, write, and math, right? You may read about certain things, you write about certain things, you do math based on certain ways that you're living. So that's when it gets customized outside of that. Problem is, again, K through 12 standard education doesn't do this. It doesn't allow for it. They're working. It's slowly creating some opportunities and some loopholes for people to get a much more customized experience, or a more customized experience, but it ain't there yet, and it's not going to get there. Why? Because it would have to be anarchy and chaos, and everything would have to get turned upside down for it really to be working in an efficient way. And it's not there yet. It's not going to be there in the next 10 or 20 years unless we have complete anarchy in the United States of America, which some of you will not survive. So you might not want to hope for that. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is we are on part 2 of our 4-part mini-series, The Case for Homeschooling. Number 4, if you send your kids to school, your kids end up having a different worldview and understanding of the world than what you want them to have, is your fault, because you're the one who sent them to that government-sponsored building in the first place for 12 years straight, for 8 hours a day. Number 5, you can partner with other parents and pool resources to homeschool multiple kids at once, and you get to knock out every problem of socialization, control, and knowing who your kids are associating with all in one. Number 6, customized learning. The curriculum can be tailored to your child's strengths, interests, and pace, and not putting them through the standardized process that normal school puts them through. They don't even need, that is not really as valuable as it seems. But people who work within the system will argue tooth and nail that it is, and that you're unqualified to do other things. We ain't done. We got 2 more episodes in this series. Tomorrow we'll get to that. While we're here, make sure you go to workonmygame.com, get on my email list, get my emails every day free. And workonyourgameuniversity.com had me as your direct coach. Get into all of our programs, get all of our training programs, selling yourself, content machine, 30 days of discipline, bulletproof mindset, work on your game system, and more. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all